we've been talking about in this interview about the impact of our foods and nutrition on how happy we are in our lives. And we've mentioned the properties of certain vegetables and fruits and food preparation tips on how that can help us feel happier and healthier. And now we're going to look at the impact and the power of herbs and spices on how happy and healthy we feel. And we've got expert advice from Dr. Bennett here, and he's going to talk to us about a few spices, their properties, and how they can help us.
Thanks, Kate. One thing you said, though, just triggered my mind, which I thought I might go off on a tangent for a minute.
Yeah, sure.
And that is that when one eats, often we're consumed by the flavour and the taste. But ever since I was very young, I was always aware of how I felt after I ate in my whole body. I always felt better when I'd had plenty of vegetables and fruits. So I think in my family I stood out as someone who was a bit fanatic on that.
I'm
but
like
that's
that
because,
too.
yeah, and I actually felt, regardless of the taste of the food, it actually sat better with me somehow. Not just with my digestive tract, but just I felt better. And I noticed that still, if I focus on my body and how I feel better. And as another little tangent, if people have an adverse food intolerance, often their heart rate will speed up after they've had that food or it doesn't agree with them. That's a very coarse method of assessing it, but it is important to be a little bit aware of your body, not just to ignore it.
Particularly if people don't always have the option to go to a doctor, it's good to have self-monitoring.
Some self-awareness, yeah. We don't want to be obsessed with health all the time because that can be bad too.
True.
But we set the strategy and direction and then stick to it. It's kind of my passion because it makes everything taste so much better. But I've learned some very interesting things about herbs. And it started out when I learned about black pepper. I came across black pepper's properties when I was looking at turmeric, because turmeric was being studied for its value in Alzheimer's disease. People had found a correlation between turmeric ingestion in yellow curry in Malaysia and a protection from Alzheimer's disease. I found very interesting. Now, a lot of those sort of findings come up in research papers, and you know, if it happens once in one study, that doesn't really mean that much, but it's come up as a fairly consistent finding. And so I was devouring studies on turmeric, and I discovered that the yellow component in the turmeric, called curcumin, wasn't easily digested if you just had it on its own. And so I was studying this with Luke, your brother, and we were trying to work out what things helped to assimilate curcumin with the active ingredients of turmeric. And so in our studies we came across black pepper, and in fact it's not the black pepper, it's the white core of the black peppercorn that has this peculiar property that it enhances greatly the absorption of curcumin. Something like between 20 and 60 times the amount is absorbed. And so the same researchers who were studying this were Indians from the continent of India, and they studied the properties of pepper to help the assimilation of all manner of vitamins and minerals and other phytochemicals and substances like CoQ10. I don't know if you've heard of CoQ10.
Maybe you could explain a little
well,
bit.
it's one of many substances in some foods, actually from tobacco, but it's an important part of the energy metabolism of cells. But its absorption is greatly enhanced by the piperine in pepper, and it's in the white core. So I consider black pepper to be God's little vitamin tablet. It doesn't have that many vitamins in it on its own, but if you just put it on your food. So the amount of black pepper, it's not like a massive dose, it's just an ordinary dose, a culinary dose, the dose that one would have to enjoy with their food.
And I actually do that rather than buying a multivitamin supplement.
I think that's, I mean, it's a very cheap way of getting better use of your food. One needs to be a little careful with pepper though if you're on certain medication. So they can affect the absorption of the medications and make it more intense, the effect of, particularly Dilantin is one such drug.
Right.
Not that many people are on it, but one needs to be a little careful if you're on medication. The benefit or the effect of pepper only lasts for about 2 hours. And so just so the viewers know that if they do take some pepper on their food, it's unlikely to affect medications 2 hours later. Bleeding with other blood thinners makes the blood less likely to coagulate. It's only a mild effect. In fact, it's actually a desirable effect if you're not on drugs. Just slightly thin the blood. So what else have we got there?
Cinnamon?
Yeah, cinnamon. Cinnamon's a fantastic herb. I mean, I love cinnamon.
And it tastes so good.
It does.
On
I have
ice cream?
Yeah, and yogurts. All sorts of desserts. But there's a few clinical trials looking at cinnamon and its effect on blood sugar, and it does tend to reduce the need for certain diabetic medications in 2 trials that I read.
That's great to know.
Yeah. And I think they were placebo-controlled trials, so they had to put the cinnamon in capsules, which is unfortunate they didn't get to taste it. But so it's a very interesting herb. It also seems to have some beneficial effects on the cholesterol levels in the blood. And so one would expect that cinnamon would help people who have borderline blood sugar metabolism, where they're not quite diabetic. Because if you're not quite diabetic, you do still have an increased risk of artery disease.
That's important for people to know.
So having a little bit of cinnamon on a breakfast cereal or yogurt, fruit, can be very beneficial. Put it in your smoothie if you have a smoothie. If you have a...
Or mango shake, or...
Yeah.
Like a lot of people love mango and fruit shakes here, so...
Yeah.
That would be a good way.
Yeah. So it's a very interesting herb. Ginger everybody knows and just about everybody loves it. It has some positive effects to slightly thin the blood, which is good, particularly if you're at risk of strokes or heart attacks. It's an anti-inflammatory and it's very good for nausea. And it's an anti-cancer herb, like most of the herbs are, helpful for preventing cancer. The other interesting herb is garlic. Now garlic taken as a supplement is very potent at thinning the blood and can cause bleeding. But it's, you know, we give drugs to people to prevent strokes if they're at risk of strokes. And so garlic is an interesting one in that respect. But if you're going to have an operation, you don't want to be taking garlic supplements because you will bleed too much.
And for women during their cycle, certain
during
stages.
menses, that's correct. But it's also an antibacterial and anti-helminthic agent. So what's an anti-helminthic? It prevents worms from proliferating. Worms do not like onions and garlic. In fact, if you try and have a garden with worms, you can't put onion and garlic in it.
So it's good for parasites.
It is. It's good at inhibiting parasites. It won't eradicate them, but it will help.
That's good to know.
It is. The whole onion family is good that way. The other interesting thing is that pawpaw seeds do the same. Not that we tend to eat pawpaw seeds.
I've started eating them because I've heard that the whole fruit is the healthiest, like the skin, the seeds in general of fruits is very beneficial.
The seeds do have special chemicals in them. Well, the apple seed has arsenic in it, of course. In fact, a little bit of... don't try this at home. A little bit of arsenic is good for you. In fact, if you... this is another tangent. If you look at single-cell organisms, in fact, little organisms, if you expose them to little bits of stress, chemicals and poisons, toxins, the organisms tend to respond in such a way that it improves their outcome and how long they live. So stressing things is not always a bad thing. So we could sort of